Close your eyes for a moment. Only for a moment, allow this small escape. And imagine. Imagine waking up tomorrow not being any day. Imagine that when opening your eyes, something fundamental in the fabric of reality, in your own perception of yourself and others, has changed forever. That specific pain, the one you know so intimately, the one you keep locked on 7 keys in the most basement dark and humid of your soul. That old-sided tox that arises out of nowhere on a sunny day. The anxiety that squeezes her chest like a vigor before an important connection, before a crucial decision. The loneliness that echoes in the nights, turning her room into a vast desert. Imagine that this pain, all these pain, suddenly had a form. A color, a texture, that they manifested in you, around you, like an aura and shadow, an ethereal scar, visible to anyone who crossed their path. Maybe it was a gray, dense mist hoeing your shoulders, weighing them down, denouncing the burden you carry. Or perhaps a light and thin crack, almost beautiful in its tragedy, to draw on the skin above your heart, throbbing gently with each beat suffered. It could be a shadow that drags behind you, a little misshapen, imitating your deepest fears, your more rooted insecurities, growing or decreasing according to the intensity of your torment. Or translucent thorns that sprang from his skin in times of acute anguish, or a specific color that would dye his hands when blaming him, squeezed. What would you do? How would you face the mirror in the morning, seeing not only its reflection, but the visible map of your internal battles? How would you go out to the street, knowing that each passer could read to you the stories you do so hard to hide? The question that pulsates in the air, uncomfortable, urgent, almost aggressive in its simplicity, is this. If your pain gained body, if it became undeniably visible, the mask you wear every day, would she finally fall? Or would you just look for more elaborate masks? We have become, throughout our lives, masters consummated in the art of concealment. It is almost a second nature, a survival ability learned since childhood when we realize that certain emotions are inconvenient, that vulnerability can be confused with weakness, used against us. We smile when we want to collapse in tears. We say, "I'm fine, all great," with a rehearsed conviction, when in fact our inner world is collapsing, ruining in silence. We carry invisible weights, lingers of painful memories that haunt our thoughts, of non-said words that turn into us in their throat, of undone dreams that leave a bitter taste of frustration. And all this happens under the surface, a turbulent, deep ocean, stirred by invisible chains of fear and sadness, hidden under a thin layer of seemingly serene and unbreakable ice. But what if this surface shattered once and for all? And if the ocean came to light, with all its fury and melancholy, so that everyone could see? Think about the implications. On the first day of this new world, the shock. A global silence, perhaps, followed by a collective panic scream. Looking sideways on the subway, the bus, the coffee, and see not only tired or hurried faces, but also the visible manifestations of each other's battles. A co-worker, always so polished and controlled, now with a pulsating aura of a red furious around the head, indicating overwhelming stress, anger contained about exploding. A loved one, someone you thought you knew deeply, with delicate tears of crystal that form and evaporate in the air like a subtle and constant rain, revealing a continuous sadness, a persistent melancholy that you never perceived in all its depth. And you, which would be your distinctive brand? Your signing of pain? Would you hide at home, refusing to face the world? Would you try to cover it with more layers of disguise, scarves, thick coats, heavy makeup, now tragically useless in the face of this new transparency? Or, for the first time in a long time, perhaps throughout his life, he would feel a strange, paradoxical, and liberating relief for not having to pretending, for not having so much to spend so much energy supporting a facade. The small conversation, "How are you?" Automatic and empty, it would completely lose its meaning, would become a joke of bad taste. The look would become the main communication tool, an instant diagnosis of the soul. Would it be unbearable to face each other and be viewed with this emotional nudity? Or, paradoxically, would force us to a more genuine, more honest, even painful connection? Imagine the brutal, almost wild honesty of this world. There would be no way to hide recent mourning, the corrosive envy that feels for the success of the neighbor, the paralyzing fear of the future, the remorse for a harsh word said without thinking. The job interviews would be interesting. The recruiter would see not only his resume, but also the form of your anxiety, your insecurity, perhaps even your desperation for that vacancy. The first romantic encounters would be a field of instant revelations. Family meetings, family meetings, a festival of tangible pains hovering on the table along with the smell of the roast. Would we develop a new language, a semiotic of pain, a dictionary of shapes, colors, and textures, where a purple mist would mean deep mourning and dark spots under the eyes, not tired, but of an old guilt? Perhaps the shape of someone's pain said more about their journey, their resilience, their battles expired and lost, than any carefully chosen word. Art would change radically. Painters would retract not only the physical form, but the shape of pain. Musicians would make up symphonies based on human anguish colors. Poets would write odes to the shadows that accompany us. And how would society react to this massive and inescapable exposure? Would there be judgment? Oh, certainly. Human nature, with its tendency to categorize and hierarchize, would find new ways with smaller pains, more aesthetics, or perhaps nobler. The pain of a misunderstood artist, perhaps? Would the new privileged ones? Or, on the contrary, would be seen as superficial, unable to a genuine emotional depth, as if the absence of visible and dramatic pain were a sign of a fully lived life? Feared, avoided, as if your pain is contagious? Or, perhaps, in a flash of hope, they would be revered by their extraordinary resilience for carrying their marks with raw and admirable dignity as veterans of invisible wars. A new and profitable new industry could emerge, not just healing, which would certainly intensify, but pain makeup. Attempts desperate to normalize, beautify, or simply disguise visible suffering. Creams to soften the edges of the shadows, pills to lighten the mist of sadness, even aesthetic surgeries to reshape the ugly manifestations of pain. Capitalism would find, as always, a way to profit from human suffering, even if made visible. It's an idea that disturbs, isn't it? That bothers you deeply, because it touches the heart of our shared humanity, this universal ability to feel pain, and, at the same time, in our most sacred individuality, in our right to privacy of our most intimate feelings. If this reflection is starting to echo there, if this image of a world where pain has physical form stirs its own perceptions, with your own hidden pains, I invite you to leave a like in this video. Not as an automatic, empty gesture, but as a silent recognition that this journey of questioning is important, and perhaps, we desperately need to talk more about what we really feel, even if the world still doesn't make us show. Think of the unimaginable weight that would be taken of your shoulders, the weight of pretending, the colossal energy, the Herculean effort we spend daily with each interaction to maintain the composure, to design an image of unshakable strength, of constant happiness, a perfectly organized life and failure. What if this energy, all this vital force wasted on maintaining appearances, could it be redirected? For real, deep and sustained healing, for mutual understanding, for the construction of bridges where today are walls of silence and misunderstandings, for the construction of stronger, more authentic, based not the illusory perfection we try to sell, but on the acceptance of the painful imperfection that makes us paradoxically more human and more connected. Of course, fear would be a constant companion in the early days of this new reality. The overwhelming fear of the judgment of others, of the total exposure of our fragility, the vulnerability that would leave us naked before the world. But what is, in fact, frightening? Being seen in its entirety, with its lights and shadows, with its open wounds and proud scars, or living a lifetime hidden behind. An increasingly heavy, never truly known mask, not even for itself, in a self-imposed and painful loneliness. Wouldn't your mind itself, of its own secret, be, in the long run, more suffocating than the exposure? Perhaps in this world of visible pain, empathy would flourish in a way that we can barely conceive today. A visceral, almost instinctive empathy. See the pain of the other, not as an abstract passage, not as a statistic cold, but as a palpable, undeniable manifestation. It could break the barriers of selfishness and indifference that they characterize our times so much. We could finally understand in our core that suffering is not a personal failure, a defect of character, but an inherent condition of human existence, an intrinsic part of one's journey. That everyone, without exception, at some level, we carry our crosses, our particular forms of pain, and perhaps compassion would become the currency, kindness, a natural reflection, not an extraordinary virtue, care, a collective responsibility. But there is always the other side of the coin, the shadow of this empathic utopia, isn't it? The saturation. What if the constant, ubiquitous view of the pain of others disinsights us? Empathy, if, instead a visual and emotional tiredness, a fatigue of compassion, an almost desperate desire to look away, to protect itself from the suffering that seems to emanate from every corner? It is a dark but painfully real possibility. Human nature is this complex tangle of contradictions, capable of the most sublime altruism and the coldest and calculating indifference. We could become cynical, anesthetized. For as the pain part of the landscape, treating it something to be ignored to maintain its own sanity. And you, individually, how would this visibility transform your relationship with your own pain? You would spend your life trying to eradicate it at any cost, seeking miraculous healing, submitting to treatments to change its shape, color, or texture in an incessant search for normality, painfully absent. Or, over time, with maturity forced by this exhibition, learn to accept it as an indelible part of who you are, part of your history, your unique tapestry. Perhaps even seeing with a certain tragic beauty, such as the marks of a battle you survived, like the scars that tell the story of your resilience. Imagine the indescribable freedom of not need more justifying, not having to find words to explain the knot in the throat that prevents you from speaking, or the emptiness in the look that denounces the absence of hope. Pain would simply be there, a silent but eloquent witness of his journey, his humanity. Our intimate relationships, the pillars of our emotional existence, would be put to fire. The romantic love, with its promises of unconditional acceptance, could it really endure this constant emotional nudity, this transparency without filters, weight of naked and would you raw disintegrate truth under the deep friendship, one that is based on trust and complicity, would be strengthened, finding a new level of intimacy and honesty, where pains are not barriers but bridges for an understanding deeper and more true. Where I love you also mean, implicitly and powerfully, I see your pain, I recognize it, I welcome you, and I am here by your side, not to fix it, but to witness it with you. What would it be like to raise children in this world? Teach them early on that pain is visible, which is part of a human being, and that there is no shame on that? Perhaps the new generations would grow up with much more developed emotional intelligence, a much healthier welcome and expression. It is an exercise of powerful imagination, almost painful in itself, because he confronts us with the uncomfortable truth that, even invisible to the eyes, the pain is real. It is a often silent driving force that shapes our lives, our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and pretend that it does not exist. Sweep it under the carpet of consciousness, it does not make it disappear. It only makes it more lonely, heavier, more insidious. If you know someone who may benefit from this reflection, someone you feel that you carry an invisible weight, who fights your battles in silence, share this video. Sometimes a simple gesture of recognition, the suggestion that we are not alone in our deepest questions, it can be a small balm, a connecting spark in a world that has often isolated us in our own pains. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, and seeks a safe space to dive into these reflections that touch the soul, which challenge the status quo of superficiality, I invite you to be part of our community. Together, we can explore these complex territories of human experience. Could we, as a society, if this premise came true, build a new social contract, a pact based on that radical and inevitable honesty? Is a contract where vulnerability is no longer synonymous with weakness, but of supreme courage, authenticity? Where to take care of the pain of the other, offer support and understanding? Is it as important, as vital, as taking care of your own pain? Where is success not measured by the absence of problems or the facade of perfect happiness, but by the ability to cross the storms of life with integrity, with compassion for themselves and others, and with the dignity of those who accept their humanity completely? It would be a painful utopia, perhaps, permeated by the constant view of suffering, but it would undoubtedly be a more real, more humane utopia, more connected with the essence of what it means to live. The strength in this new world would not reside not to feel pain, a futile search for permanent emotional anesthesia. That would be to deny one's life. True strength would be in feeling the pain fully, allowing it to cross us, teach us, transform us, and still continue. Not to look away from the pain of the other, but to offer a shoulder, a listening, a presence. Not to erase the pain, because some pains are indelible, but to help carry it, to divide the burden, to remind the other that he is not alone on his crossing, in recognizing its own pain without being consumed for it, without allowing it to define the totality of our being, but integrating it as a part of our history, a severe but often wise teacher. Today, at this very moment, our pain does not have a visible form for the outside world. She hides behind forced, carefully rehearsed smiles. She disguises her in resigned silences, in low looks. She camouflages herself in a frantic activity, in an incessant search for distractions that try in vain to fill the inner void. But she is there, pulsating, in me while I record these words, in you as you listen to them, in every person who crosses our way, carrying their own invisible battles. And perhaps the real challenge, the true revolution, is not to imagine what it would be like if it were visible, but to start acting, here and now, as if it were already. Cultivate empathy as a muscle, kindness as a habit, listening attentive and without judgments as our main connection tool. Offer a safe space, an acceptance look, so that masks can gradually be lowered, without fear, without shame. Because, in the end, beyond all our differences, pain is a universal language. It does not distinguish creed, color, social class, or gender. It connects us to our most fundamental, raw, more true humanity. And perhaps, only perhaps, if we stopped fleeing her so hard, If we stopped pretending that it does not belong to us, that we are not part of us, we would find a force that we did. Not know to have. An unsuspected resilience and a connection with each other we never imagined being possible, and forged brotherhood in the mutual acceptance of our shared suffering. The question, then, returns, echoing in the silence of your own introspection, deeper and perhaps more urgent than at first. If your deeper pain, the one you barely dares to name to yourself, materialize now, right now, before you, what would be the first word you would say to her? It would be a word of anger, denial, of fear, or would it be perhaps a word of recognition, acceptance, perhaps even a bitter welcome? And what would you do? How would you feel if, when you look sideways, see the shape of the pain of all those you love, exposed, vulnerable? We would continue the same dance of appearances, the same emotional hide-and-hide game, or we would finally dare together to be unbearably, wonderfully, painfully real. The answer, my friend, lies only inside you.